Here we are now at the teaching session for this morning, Weaponized Sex in the Bible. We are looking at Proverbs 31, and I think that tonight is going to be, or this morning is going to be the last session that we will have in Proverbs 31. So if you would be so kind as to turn in your Bibles to the 31st of the book of Proverbs. And as you're turning, let me tell you once again that this has to do with Lemuel and his mother. Lemuel is the pet name, or is the nickname that Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, has given him. And so this is Solomon who is receiving instruction from his mother Bathsheba. Bathsheba is that woman who was actually taken by the king. The king abused his position of trust and authority, and he took another man's wife. That wife's name was Bathsheba. The husband was a valiant soldier in the Israelite army, and the king then had him murdered by using the weapons of the enemy, by putting Uriah in the front line. So this is a woman who has now had two children. By this time she's had several children by David. Solomon is the second. The first one died. There was a great deal of suffering that took place. And so now Bathsheba is talking to her second son, whom she refers to as Lemuel. His real name is Solomon. This is the way you know him in the Bible. She gives him instructions on how to select the right bride, whether the woman should be this kind or that kind, and she gives him several points of advice. Those points of advice are found in Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 contains two installments of wisdom. The first installment is found in verses 1 through 9. The second installment is found in verses 10 through 31. And so in the past, I have given you these 3 points of introduction. Number 1, in Roman numerals, introduction to the book of Proverbs. Number 2, the first installment, which is verses 1 through 9. And number 3 in Roman numerals, the second installment of Bathsheba's wisdom, and that is found in verses 10 to the end of the chapter, actually the book of Proverbs. Here is my favorite slide that I like to present to all of you, and that is that the excellent wife, according to the wisdom of Bathsheba, has 5 items that she looks at when she looks in the mirror. Just as when a woman looks in the mirror, she checks her hair, checks her clothes, checks her makeup. These are the 5 items that she needs to check as far as her soul is concerned. Her competence, we find this in verse 10. Her character, verse 10. Her calling, verses 11 and 12. Her characteristics, found in verses 13 through 27. And then finally, her crown. That is, what is the payout? What does she get paid for all of this? What is her reward? We find this in verses 28 through 31. So here I have an image, and you can see it on the screen. A lady is looking at herself in a mirror. And I'm going to ask the question, where is she going? When a woman looks in the mirror, she's going out to dinner. She's going out to work. She's going out somewhere. But where is the Proverbs 31 woman going? She's going to meet the Lord. She's going to meet her Maker. And that is the person that is important to you ladies. The person that is important to you is your God. And so it's important for you that you look upon that level. Not the external part, which is your body, but the internal part, which is the beautiful and that part which is well-pleasing to the Lord. that inner beauty which is well-pleasing to the Lord. Okay. We have noted that the Torah, that is the first 5 books of the Bible, tells us that the Jewish mother is called the Aberet Habayit, and this means that she is the main figure of the house. She is the foundation of the house in Israel. Now, this probably just sounds like a bunch of gibberish or gobbledygook. But you see, Israel is the model nation. God uses this nation in order for other nations to look and to say, my, look at how well ordered their civilization is. Look at how well their women are treated. Look at how well their servants are treated. Look at how well they eat. Look at how they have wonderful sanitation. Look at all of these good things. And who is the basis of all of that? It is the mother. You say, what? I always thought that this was a patriarchal society. Well, in God's sight, the patriarch is incomplete without his right woman. And that right woman is found in Proverbs 31. So we have seen up until now Bathsheba's second installment in 5 easy lessons. First, we saw her competence, her character, her calling, and number 4, her characteristics. Under her characteristics, we find that there are several of them, and we have 2 points of introduction. First of all, that characteristics are different than character. Character is what is on the inside that is then seen coming out to the outside. Characteristics are what is on the outside. This is what the people see. And we see that her characteristics are divided into 3 different categories. So what are those characteristics? The first of them is that she is a faithful wife. An excellent wife is a faithful wife. Verses 11 and 12. Next, we see that an excellent wife is a diligent wife. Verse 13 of Proverbs 31. Her diligence is seen under 6 different particular facets. We see that she acknowledges her duty. She knows what her job is as a wife. There are a lot of women who get married and they don't know what is expected of them. They just think, well, it's the next step to take. But the excellent wife is diligent. She has learned what her job is going to be, and she's learned it from the time that she was a little girl. Why? Because her mother and her father have been teaching her this. In the old days, we used to do this. We used to teach little girls how to be excellent wives and mothers. How was that done? Well, parents would give little girls dolls to play with. As soon as dolls were given to boys, then boys were being mothers. Well, that isn't right. It's the mothers that need to be mothers. How do we know that? Well, all you have to do is look at body parts. Mothers have breasts. Breasts are made to feed babies. They are made so that she can comfort, coddle, make comfortable, show affection to a baby. That is her primary purpose in being a mother to this child. She acknowledges what her duties are. Verse 14, she's like merchant ships. A ship is something that brings in goods from overseas, brings them from foreign lands. This is what she does. She brings in her menu from another place. She varies her menu for her family. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. I won't labor on this very much, but she is ready to do whatever task comes about. She girds herself with strength. That means that she tightens her belt. She makes herself ready for whatever task is available. Verse 18, which would be the 4th facet, and that is that she senses that her work is good. She is constantly quality controlling her product. She wants to know whether her product is going to be good or bad. She doesn't want to turn out something that is not good. Verses 19 and 20, she uses her hands, and we saw how there is such a wonderful portraiture, a little vignette that is stuck in Proverbs 31 that tells us about the hands of this woman. Because not only is she strong, but she's also dexterous. And not only is she dexterous, but she extends her hands to the poor. The law of kindness is on her tongue, and her hand shows that kindness to the poor. She has a tender heart. That's a fantastic thing. And what's more, her hand is also the bent hand, like the fist, which means that she will carry a project through to the end. What a beautiful picture we have here of this excellent wife. And then in verse 27, we see that her priorities center around her family. She is defined by her family. Just as a man is defined by his job, she is defined by her family. When people see her family, they say, oh, this must be so-and-so's kid, because look at the way this kid is dressed. Look at the way this kid behaves himself. And so this is what we find. The excellent wife is diligent. Well, let's move on to our next point. Let me tell you, I grew up in Chicago. And I have a couple of images up here on the screen. And I have letter E, F, and G above the images. And I want to talk about letter E and letter G. And letter F, I just want to kind of occlude that, put it into the background. So let me do that. Whoops, go back here. Come on back. Something happened to my slide. It's not occluding. Let me point to the image on the left. And where are we? Here we are. Can you see this? I grew up in Chicago. And they have subway trains there. And as a kid, guess what I used to do? Hop over the turnstile. Now back then, it used to cost 13 cents to ride the subway. And it wasn't so much that if you paid it, it was going to break you. It's just that it was fun. It was great to be. There's this little bar there, and if you're a teenage kid, you can jump right over it. No big deal. Now, I know that lately in New York City, and especially with that awful state representative AOC, they've made a real big deal about the fare beaters. But I want to talk to you about what is prudent. Prudent is that quality which you ladies have as to what you let in. And oftentimes there are thoughts, there are notions, there are people who have influence who will jump the turnstile of your soul. And your prudence is that quality that you have that editorializes that and says, I'm not going to retain this notion. Yeah, it came in. I wasn't being very careful. I read a magazine. I watched the Oprah, or I watched, what's that other show on TV? Some other show. And something got into my head, but I'm not going to retain that. That's prudence. See? The excellent wife has that. Somebody may sneak in. That's prudence. Now, jump down here to where it says discreet. Can you see that? Discreet is this one here. This is sometimes referred to as the Iron Maiden. And that means that when you're getting off the subway, you can go through this turnstile, but you'll notice that there are opposing bars, And that is so that once you're out, you can't get back in. And at the same time, when you're coming out, nobody can sneak in behind you and get in without paying. I don't know. Maybe this doesn't strike home or doesn't hit home because we live here in Seattle. But when I was growing up, there were a number of these things that were meant to keep certain people out. On the freeways, if you can imagine this, they used to have these restaurants that were built on overpasses, and as you would drive under, you could stop at a restaurant and you'd have to get off on a clover leaf, and then you go up, they were called Howard Johnson's, and you could get off and buy a sandwich or get some coffee, get a cold drink or whatever. But when you've been on a freeway for a while and you have been drinking liquids, guess what you gotta do? That's right. At the Howard Johnson's, they charged you for every sandwich, for every drink, for every coffee, but they also charged you for going to the bathroom. And you had to put a dime in the slot for the door to open. And they had these big spikes on the floor so you couldn't crawl under, and big spikes on top so you couldn't crawl over the top. Do you know what? Almost everybody hated those. And they rebelled against the idea, somebody's charging me to go to the bathroom. That should be a human right, don't you think? So everybody, and it didn't matter what your background was, didn't matter where you came from, if you had to pay the dime, and as you were getting out of the stall and somebody wanted to use the stall, you know what you did? You held the door open for that person. You know why? Because it was an insult that you had to pay to use that. Well, that is what prudence and discretion is. Discreet means that you are very careful as to what you let out. Prudence is what you let in. Discreet is what you let out. And as a woman, an excellent wife, you have this skill. This is not something that you're born with. This is something that you have to, first of all, appreciate so that you will acquire. And once you acquire it, then you can begin to use it. So let's begin, first of all, with discretion. You'll notice that I skipped compassionate. We'll get to that, but prudent first. An excellent wife is prudent. First of all, let's begin with the word study. What does the word prudent mean? Well, the word prudent in Hebrew is the word sakal. Sakal, it's the verb sakal. It's kind of like the sock you put on, and cal like California, sakal. And this word means to act wisely, to give attention to ponder, and eventually to prosper. In other words, if you pay attention, you're going to prosper. Well, that's the short answer. Let's give it a little bit longer answer. First and foremost, this word is found over 75 times in the Old Testament. The basic and original meaning of sakal seems to be to look at. So, if I am going to be looking at this pen, that is sakal. It means to look at. It means to give attention to. As I look at it, I notice that it has a little button on the top, and you click it, and it makes the point come out at the bottom, and that point has been impregnated with ink so that I can write with it. So it means to look at, to give attention to, and there is a parallelism that is given to it. It is found in Isaiah 41 and verse 20. Verse 20, Isaiah 41 and verse 20, this is what it says. And this is a parallelism. That means that two words are used here, and it's like one hand washing another. They both get clean this way, but The one hand enhances the first one, the second one enhances the second one. And verse 20 says, that they may see and recognize. Can you see it? See and recognize. See and recognize. And consider and gain. Can you see? Once again, you have this parallelism. And that is what this word prudent means. Prudent means that you are able to look at and you're able to recognize. Say prudent. So that they may see and recognize, consider and gain insight as well, that the hand of the Lord has done this, and the Holy One of Israel has created it. In other words, the point is that you look at something and you say, God is behind this. Prudence in the excellent wife means that she's able to see that God is working behind the scenes. And this is something, ladies, that is very important to you. And that is that God is always working behind the scenes in your life. If you fail to see it, you fail to see it. You fail to recognize it, and you will go on in your blind way thinking, oh, why is this happening to me? And you will never see that there is, shall we say, a silver lining. Okay. Jeremiah 9:23 and 24, same type of parallelism. We'll not look at it so that we don't have to see that. The other word that is used here is the word yadah, which is to know, and it means that you primarily know it experimentally. So you see something and you experiment it, or you experience it, and that's the idea here behind the parallelism. Number 3, prudence distinguishes when acts are courageous as opposed to reckless or cowardly. So when a woman is being prudent, she knows this is a courageous act as opposed to, that was a reckless act. I grew up in Chicago. About 2 blocks from my house, there was a 10-story hotel. The 10-story hotel was built like a donut. It had a hole in the middle. And that hole in the middle would go 10 stories straight down. So we as boys would like to sneak up there and jump across that hole. Courageous or reckless? When you're a kid, you don't know the difference. But I'll tell you what, my mother would know the difference, and so should every prudent woman. Because that's what prudence tells you. The difference between that which is reckless and that which is courageous. Now there's also cowardly. And that is sometimes the person says, well, I'm not going to do that. And somebody would say, well, that was a smart move. You're a chicken, that's all. A mother knows that. A prudent woman knows that. Without prudence, bravery becomes foolhardiness. Mercy sinks to weakness. Free self-expression and kindness to censure. Humility into degradation and arrogance. Selfishness into corruption. And temperance into fanaticism. This is this virtue of prudence. And ladies, this is what an excellent wife has. Now this is so very, very important, because people will point to you and say, you are responsible for doing such and such. And the American public is feeling some of that shame and guilt. They're teaching that in our public schools today. They call it CRT. And they're saying, because you belong to this ethnic group, you are responsible for such and such. You are not. The Bible is very clear in Ezekiel chapter 18. It says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. God is not going to hold the Son responsible for what the Father did. And if God isn't going to hold that Son responsible for what the Father did, who do you think you are? Now, this is very, very important, because the American public today is being snowed by people with loud voices. They're imprudent. In modern English, the word prudent has become increasingly synonymous with cautiousness. In this sense, prudence names a reluctance to take risks, which remains a virtue with respect to unnecessary risks, but when unreasonably extended into over-cautiousness, can become the vice of cowardice. A prudent woman knows the difference, and she will train her sons to know the difference. Now, this is very important because if you are a young man and you are going to select a wife, a bride, you want to ask the right questions. Don't be afraid that you're going to embarrass or that you are going to somehow say something that's going to make the other person feel uncomfortable. You are going to marry this person. In this case, it was Solomon who's going to become the king, and he should not be afraid to ask his future bride, are you this? Let's just put it into very, very simple black and white terms. Are you a worshiper of Jehovah? Yes or no? That's the simple. Prudence teaches the son how to ask those questions and to move forward. According to Roman wisdom, okay, now we're not talking about Bible wisdom, we're talking about Roman wisdom. Now let me introduce Roman wisdom a little bit. Roman wisdom was designed by Romans, because Romans sat around the fire and they always thought, what can we do to make our people stronger and mightier? Why? Because the Romans were short little people. They weren't tall, they were short. In fact, they were a lot like Jewish men. They say that the average height was like 5 feet 1 inch. I have a daughter who's about the same height, and you know what she does? She combs her hair up like this so she looks taller. So the Romans were short people, and they wondered, what can we do to make ourselves stronger as a society? They came up with a list of virtues, and the virtues that comprise prudence are these. First of all, memoria, and that is an accurate memory. That is a memory that is true to reality. In other words, you remember the truth, not some dream that you had. This is the truth. It's an ability to learn from experience. That's what memoria is. The second integrant part was called docilitas, which we get the word docile from, and it means that this is a person who is teachable. This is an open-mindedness that recognizes variety and is able to seek and to make use of the experience and the authority of others. I don't know if you caught that, but a person who is teachable is able to make use of this person's experience and is able to make use of somebody else's authority. I was very good friends with a mother who had a couple of teenage children. And the boy would say, I want to learn this by myself. And the mother would say, I already made that mistake. I'm telling you, don't make that mistake. Learn from my experience. That's the idea here. There are a lot of people who just won't do it. They're not docile. They're not teachable. Intelligentia. And this is the understanding of first principles. In other words, you know what priorities are. This is more important than this. That's intelligentia. Soleratia. This is shrewdness. or a quick-wittedness, the ability to evaluate a situation rapidly or quickly. I don't know. You can maybe liken it to, you go to the store and the lady's ringing up your groceries and you can do the math in your head. That's the idea here. What makes a society strong? It's when the mind is active. It is not in neutral. It is constantly working, constantly working. Numbers. So what if they're numbers? Number 5, ratio. We get our word rational from this. This is discursive reasoning and the ability to research and compare alternatives. Discursive reasoning. In other words, you look at things and you're able to compare. Is this or this? Should I get a donut or should I get a Long John? Well, that's a problem. Providentia. This is foresight, and this is prudence is actually a shortened form of providentia. And that means to look ahead. The idea to estimate whether a particular action can realize your goals, can make your goals come true. That's prudence. Is this convenient or not? That's prudence. 7, circumspection. This is the ability to take all the circumstances into account. That is, the circumstances that are germane to the issue at hand. So, you're planning a picnic. The circumstances are, do we have sandwiches? Do we have drinks? And is it going to be rainy or is it going to be sunny? You're not thinking, are the Penguins going to be playing hockey way back in the east? Not germane to the issue. Number 8, caution, the ability to mitigate risk. Now this is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites because this is when you say it's worth it. I don't know whether I can do this or not, but it's worth the risk. We have several quotes that come from the War of Independence. One of my favorites is, give me liberty or give me death. Why? Because life without liberty is not worth living. I think it was Nathan Hale who was hanged by the neck until dead. You know what he said? I regret that I have but one life to give for my country. Mitigating the risk. Our society says, better be red than dead. What? Take your liberty away? You might just as well be dead. In fact, you'll become a slave to the state, to the oligarchy. Okay, so we have looked at, so far, the word prudent as a word study. It's the word sakal in Hebrew. We've taken a look at the way the modern word is used, and we have looked at Roman wisdom, and now letter D, the word sakal as used in the book of Proverbs. The word sakal as used in the book of Proverbs. First of all, Proverbs 10 and verse 5. Would you open your Bibles, please, to Proverbs 10 and verse 5. Proverbs 10 and verse 5. The word that we are going to see here is the word sakal, and it is actually translated wisely. This is what it says. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely or prudently. Prudently. The contrast is, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts imprudently, shamefully. See, this is what prudence does. It reveals a contrast between what is wise and what is unwise. Verse 19. And this time, this is what it says. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable. But he who restrains his lips is wise. The person who talks less is prudent. The person who talks too much is imprudent. Remember, prudence means what you let in and what you decide you want to keep. Right? People may jump the turnstile. Notions might jump into your head. But you don't have to keep those notions. That's prudence. Okay, you will notice that Proverbs 10:5, the caption on the side says, reveals a contrast, begins with our. 10:19, restrains the lips, begins with our. Verses 20 and 23 of Proverbs 16, you fill in the R. I couldn't think of a good R. So if you can think of a good R, let me know and we'll fill it in there. Would you go to Proverbs 16? And we'll take a look at verses 20 and 23. Verse 20. The heart of the wise, that is, the heart of the prudent. Where'd it go? I just lost it. Verse 20. Let me begin. He who gives attention to the word will find good, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. The word here, gives attention, is the one who is prudent as far as the word is concerned will find good, and he is blessed who trusts in the Lord. Jump to verse 23. The heart of the prudent instructs his mouth. In other words, the brain should tell the mouth what to say instead of the other way around. One of my favorite sayings is that the tail should not wag the dog. Okay, that's the picture here. In other words, let the prudence tell the mouth what to say. And adds perverseness to his lips. Question, answer.
Rich in wisdom.
Rich in wisdom. Very good. The heart of the wise instructs his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. All right. You guys add the R if you can find one. Rich is good. So let me know afterwards. Proverbs 21:16. Please look at that now. Proverbs 21. Verse 16. A man who wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the assembly of the dead. A man who wanders from the way of understanding, that is, the man who wanders away from prudence, is going to find a resting place among the dead. Shows what prudence does, or the lack of thereof. Okay, we've taken a look at the word study. Now let's take a look at our actual wisdom that Bathsheba gave. Would you please turn to Proverbs 31. And verses 15 and 16 say this. She rises also while it is still night, and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings she plants a vineyard. Let me put them down here. She rises while it is still early. What does that mean? It means that she has foresight. She knows that something needs to be done. She doesn't get caught by surprise. She doesn't have a flat spot on her forehead by saying, "Oh, I should have thought of that first." Instead, she's already thinking ahead, and so she gets up early in the morning. She gives breakfast to her household and to her maidens. And this means that she's training her children and her maidens that they need to plan ahead as well. And by having a good breakfast, you're going to give yourself strength to do the work that needs to be done. She gives orders to her servants. Now, we live in a society where we don't have servants. If we were to live in a third world country, there would be a real need for servants. I can remember when I was growing up that there were so many poor people in my city that if you think that the homeless are numerous here, you haven't seen anything yet. Here, there are budgets that help the homeless. When I was growing up, there wasn't any. And girls as young as 11 and 12 years old were turning to prostitution because they had nothing to eat. And it wasn't unusual for a poor person to come and to knock on the door of our house and say, "Have you got anything for me to eat?" And my grandmother would go out and give them something to eat. In fact, for some of them, she said, "Why don't you come and live with us? But you'll have to do some work if you're going to live here. You'll get 3 meals, you get a place to stay, you get free clothes." One of them is now considered my Aunt Alicia. She was about 9 years old when my grandmother took her in. She was considered like a daughter in our family. Her kids are my cousins. My grandfather paid for her wedding. You ought to see the pictures. It wasn't a cheap wedding. And it's these people who became the servants of this prudent wife. This isn't slavery. This is giving somebody a hand up so that they are able to make something of their lives. She considers a field and buys it. This is real estate. What is that? Here is a prudent woman. And she could say it in her head, location, location, location. But more than that, she would say, have they got good water there? Is the soil good? Why is that? Because she considers the field and buys it, and then she plants a vineyard. In other words, she says, this is good land, let's plant a vineyard. And what is a vineyard? A vineyard is that which produces wine. She is able not only to buy a piece of ground, but she is able then to start a business that will be profitable. That is a prudent wife. That is an excellent wife. Now, I notice that my time is up. I don't know, are the days getting shorter, or what is this? So, before we go on to our next point, and I know my time is up here, I'd like for you to turn your Bibles to Proverbs 19 and verse 14. Proverbs 19. And we'll close with this. We'll have to start again here next Sunday. Verse 14 says this: house and wealth are an inheritance from fathers. And that's just a real obvious thing. If your parents own real estate, they will pass it on to the next generation. That is why it is so important for every person to be given the opportunity to own land. And it doesn't matter what your background is, you should be given the opportunity to own land. When they erect these huge buildings and they say, you can have an apartment, you have to pay rent, that is impoverishing you. If they say, oh, it's a condo, you can buy it, you're being impoverished. You need real estate land so that once it is yours, you can pass it on to your children, who will then pass it on to their children, who will then pass it on to their children, and that is the way that you keep wealth. You don't keep wealth by giving somebody a place to live. You give wealth by giving them real estate, and that is something that you need. And so this is why it says here, house and wealth are the inheritance from parents or from fathers. But a prudent wife, now notice that last phrase, a prudent wife is from the Lord. A prudent wife is from the Lord. And so you young men who are listening to my voice, you need to apply to the Lord, to solicit the Lord to give you the right woman, because that will be the greatest contribution to your legacy that you could ever possibly imagine. And so with that, we will finish our lesson for this morning.